campaign.
In some respects, even the fact there are no pressing issues today, in some respects the candidates look fairly similar, despite the efforts of Bush and Dukakis to separate themselves on some issues.
The media, the way newspapers and television have been interpreting the poll results for them, is that it is over. That how many weeks have we been hearing now about the Republican Electoral College lock?
And what now, as this nasty, mudslinging, name-calling race enters the home stretch? Both candidates have a new strategy to win the hearts and minds of Main Street America, the battle of the network nice guys. Bush calling for a gentler, kinder America, and Dukakis playing the populist underdog, proud to stand up as a liberal.
Other political analysts say television is hardly to blame for voter apathy. In fact, lower voter turnout at the polls has been the trend since John Kennedy's victory in 1960. And when all is said and done, people actually do vote on the issues. If George Bush appears to be ahead in the polls right now, they say, the lesson of history is that no incumbent party has ever lost a race for the White House on a program of peace and prosperity. For INN Magazine in New York, I'm Barry Cunningham.
While many voters sometimes endorse Michael Dukakis, it is called the 1988 campaign sour, superficial, misleading. And the Washington Post shocked many this week when it said it wasn't endorsing either candidate, claiming that neither was fit for the job. Joining us for a pre-election look at this unusual campaign, we're delighted to have with us Norman Ornstein. Dr. Ornstein is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute for Public Policy Research. Listed in Who's Who in America, Mr. Ornstein has authored many books, including The American Elections of 1982. In Washington, we have two correspondents who have been on the political front lines. Eleanor Clift is a political correspondent for Newsweek magazine, and she's been covering the Dukakis campaign. Alessandria Stanley is a political correspondent for Time magazine who has been covering the Bush campaign. Norman, it seems to be a sad commentary when the newspaper like the Washington Post says that this election, this campaign, is a national disappointment and abstains from endorsing either candidate. How do you account for it?
Well, I'm a little disappointed at the Post. I think it's the obligation for a newspaper to come up with a choice to inform its voters, even if it doesn't like the candidates. And even if many of us have believed for a long time that this campaign was the evil of two lessers, that's probably not a good way out. But it's quite clear that the American people generally go along with that notion. They don't like either candidate. They decided probably a few weeks ago that George Bush barely passed that threshold where he was an acceptable choice. They have not decided that Michael Dukakis is, and that's been the upshot of this race for several weeks now.
The Post is more or less echoing the sentiments of the electorate.
Yeah, and almost every editorial out there is, we'll hold our nose and support this guy or the other guy.
Turning to Washington, Alessandra and Eleanor, you've been on the front lines. Why is George Bush winning? Whatever happened to the Dukakis lead, is it that the Republicans are better at packaging and the Bush team is more experienced, as Newsweek argues? Or is it because Bush is more likable than Dukakis, the nice man versus the Iceman, as a Time essay suggests? Eleanor.
Well, I think all of the above. I think that George Bush defined Michael Dukakis as a far-out liberal before Dukakis left his living room in Brookline. And I think after 8 years of Ronald Reagan and sort of a love affair with this president who seemed like Clint Eastwood in the White House, that we wanted to like this next president, we the electorate. And I think for the first time, likability and passion became campaign issues. And in the absence of any overriding other issues, the election seems to really be turning on these kinds of issues, plus the value, the emotionally charged value issues, the Pledge of Allegiance, the prison furlough, things that really are not presidential level issues, but that hit the hot buttons in the American electorate.
Alessandra?
No, I agree, actually, but I think we also have to remember that one of the reasons that nobody really seems to like these candidates very much is that we know them a little too well. I mean, if it's true that familiarity breeds contempt, we've been watching all these candidates very, very close up for almost 2 years now. And these people have been pilloried in endless profiles in my magazine and in Eleanor's and on television for every flaw, political, ideological, personal, even the most idiomatic and small touches. So I think it's very hard for people to look at these people as men of stature. But I think the process adds to that contempt. It's not just these two individuals.
Let's pursue that. You say you think the electorate has gotten to know them too well. Is that true, or is it that the electorate has got to know them through the commercials each candidate has been running? Let's look at that and the political process when INN Magazine continues.
To me, investing is a lifelong proposition. Whether you're 25 or 55, whatever your individual goals,
Sure of the candidates. Have we seen the real image, or is that image only what we've seen in the limited span of the 30-second sound bites and the commercials, each is running out of the other?
Well, I think Alessandra has a very good point. We've watched these candidates for a long time through a drawn-out primary process where the goal is, with a lot of candidates, to winnow the other guy out. And so we've blasted these candidates. Bob Dole started it with George Bush in Iowa. Others started it with Michael Dukakis early. By the time they do get to the general election campaign, we've seen all the warts, and then the general election campaign these days, especially with no incumbent running, is going to be more negative, and we have a public predisposed to believe negative things because they think all politicians are bad. Having said that, though, I think these guys do have flaws that are deeper than we've seen in other politicians. Other politicians, if they were candidates, would be out there, we would see their flaws too, whether it be Mario Cuomo or Bob Dole. George Bush's choice of Dan Quayle shook the American people. It clearly continues to shake them. He did that. Commercials didn't do that. The performance of the candidates in the debates, including Michael Dukakis in the second debate, shook people about whether he was a leader and a fighter. Commercials have reinforced things, but flaws and doubts that we see about these candidates to some degree are real.
Flaws are there, yet George Bush is still in the lead.
Well, somebody's going to be in the lead here. And it was clear from the beginning, when we did have peace and prosperity, that there would be a benefit of the doubt given to the incumbent party. The fact that it stayed relatively close, given the nature of the times, given the fact that Bush did not have to struggle to win that nomination the way many people thought he would, is some testament to the uneasiness that people have. And of course, all of our surveys suggest that even though a majority has favored Bush for a long time, half of that vote or more is soft. There are people who would move very quickly if they thought they had a better alternative. They don't.
Alessandra, George Bush, through his aggressiveness on the campaign trail and the negative advertising, has succeeded in changing that wimp image he had. You have observed firsthand the metamorphosis?
Sure, and actually it's been quite extraordinary when you try to remember what it was like in the fall of '87, a year ago, when he was a figure of ridicule. He has come back, and it has been through a couple of things. It's certainly been through the negative advertising and tearing down Michael Dukakis. At the same time, he's with the help of Roger Ailes, his media advisor, of course, and his speechwriter Peggy Noonan, he's done a very good job of taking his, what I think are his personality defects, the awkwardness, the gawkiness, and trying to turn it into an advantage, sort of trying to create a Gary Cooper and High Noon persona that probably hasn't convinced all the people, but has certainly gotten him over the rough spots. He is no longer the figure of ridicule. Unfortunately, his running mate, Dan Quayle, is.
Eleanor, you've been watching Michael Dukakis. He's accused of being cold and passionless, and he hasn't really succeeded in fighting back his image crisis. Where has he gone wrong? What are the problems there that you've observed?
Well, I think a large chunk of Michael Dukakis' campaign strategy was that George Bush would self-destruct, and I think he entered the fall campaign thinking the vice president would make the enormous gaffe out there on the campaign trail, and he, Michael Dukakis, could just coast through the election the way he did through the primaries. Well, obviously that didn't happen, and I think he also completely misread these emotional issues. He thought they didn't matter. His impulse was to just turn the other cheek, and, you know, a smear or a charge that's unanswered becomes a truth. And in the last few days, he's begun fighting back, but it sure looks like too little, too late.
We hear from so many voters, Norman, that is this the best that we have to offer? Has the system failed us? What has gone wrong here?
Well, I think we have to give serious thought to the nature of our nominating process. It's too long in one sense, it goes on for years. It's too short in another. We compress the actual decision-making into a very limited period of time. We winnow out people before we really carefully thought it through. And we also emphasize skills that work through primaries that don't work particularly well in general election campaigns, and skills that work in getting nominated and elected that aren't particularly good at governing. I'm not sure what we can do. Every time we reform, we seem to make it worse. And it's also clear, getting back to a point that Alessandra made earlier, that if some of these people who we now view as being very positive had come forward and run, we wouldn't view them quite so positively. We think they're wonderful when they have the lack of burning ambition, but once they announce, we treat them differently. There are, however, better people out there, I think, and some of them, in fact, did run and didn't make it through, which has something to do with the nature of the process. We've got to seriously think that through, and my guess is that while George Bush has tried to portray himself as Gary Cooper, he's looked a little bit more like Ralph Bellamy in some of those screwball comedies. If it turns out to be that way in governing, we are going to see some serious thinking, although some of it may turn out to be more of a bloodbath.
Would we be better off going back to the days of those smoke-filled rooms when the political power brokers would pick the candidates?
If I had my druthers, we would increase the number of superdelegates of party and elected officials who play a serious role here, up to at least 25 or 30%. But the trend, after Michael Dukakis made a deal with Jesse Jackson at the Democratic Convention, is to move it back down again, to give more of a role to the issue activists out there. That's not moving in the right direction.
Alessandra, Eleanor, is the media to blame for this so-called no-issue campaign? Have we not asked the right questions?
Well, I think we're too much hostages to the photo op, and we let the candidates set the tone, and instead of going off on our own and really probing the issues. But I'd like to go back to something Norm and Alessandra said. You know, we bemoan the defaults of the Democratic candidate primarily, this sense that George Bush was the weakest candidate in a long time and that he could have been overtaken. But I think we should mention Ronald Reagan, and he leaves office as the most popular president in a long time. George Bush is his direct and immediate heir, and it really is, by a lot of measures, the logical thing for the electorate to do, to stick with the party that has brought, you know, relative peace and tranquility. So I see this, we're entering actually the ninth year of the Reagan administration with George Bush.
Want to pick up on that, Norman?
Well, with the junior partner, certainly that is a logical extension. We didn't do that in 1960 when we had the logical successor to Dwight Eisenhower with a more energetic Democratic campaign. And I think this one could have turned out differently. It would have been close, but it could have turned out very differently had there been a more energetic Democratic campaign.
How does the quail factor enter into this election?
There's no doubt in my mind it's kept this election closer than it would otherwise be. It has been the most serious flaw in the Bush campaign and candidacy. But as Eleanor says, and it's no doubt true, you have a public out there that has appreciated the peace and prosperity that we have. Far more than a majority believe that we are in good times and are likely to continue them, and they see it as safer to pick George Bush to do those things, but with some very great misgivings.
Right, okay. And to put in a word for Dan Quayle, while he may be a drag on the ticket now, perversely, he was of great help to George Bush for a while there. He let George Bush look like the strong, dominant figure standing by his man on the ticket. And there was a bit of a media backlash there for sort of overkill on Quayle.
Okay, let's hold on that thought for a moment, and we'll continue this discussion of Campaign 1988, the final chapter, as INN Magazine continues. Stay with us.
Now's the time to get ready for the merriest family Christmas ever. Yes, now, with the brand new 1988 Celebration of Christmas collection from Better Homes and Gardens Books, to make your holidays more joyous than ever at a price that's irresistible. First, you'll get this beautiful Christmas 1988 volume of Pleasures and Treasures. Almost 200 lavishly illustrated pages of things to make, to do, and to enjoy. Dozens of recipes for holiday goodies. Crafts that even little hands can master, stories, songs, and poems, plus super ideas for parties and family fun. And your Christmas 1988 treasury with rich gold-stamped padded covers is a lasting storehouse of your priceless family memories. What's more, your collection includes this exclusive set of 2 records or cassettes. Better Homes and Gardens Christmas by the Fireside. 30 joyous Yuletide melodies by such noted artists as Mahalia Jackson, Pat Boone, and Percy Faye. For collection price, you also get this charming angel ornament. She's over 3 inches long, glowing with translucent jewel colors in heavy gold tone metal. So call now, 800-824-1300, and order your Celebration of Christmas collection for yourself, for gifts. The book, the 2 records or cassettes, and the angel have a total retail value of over $44, but all 3 can be yours for just $21.95, more than half off the retail value, plus $3 shipping and handling. So call 800-824-1300, toll free, 800-824-1300 for your 1988 Celebration of Christmas collection from Better Homes and Gardens Books, part of a continuing series of Christmas collectibles. 800-824-1300. Call today.
Eleanor and Alessandra, recently the candidates seem to have been distancing themselves from the reporters traveling with them, but you've been with them for quite a while. Have you managed to get a sense of the men beneath the bubble, maybe to give us some insight into these people that we have not seen?
Well, the insight on Michael Dukakis is about 1/4 inch deep. I remember one television cameraman said that looking at Michael Dukakis through the lens, he was still waiting for the second expression. The most revealing of himself I've seen Dukakis was the weekend after the second debate, which was obviously the low point in his campaign, and he was, fighting a sore throat, and he came back and talked to the press on every leg of the trip, insisting that there was still 3 weeks left at that point, and he could still come back. And he defended his answer about the question of his wife being raped and murdered, saying that he didn't regret his answer, he didn't regret the question, yet his wife came back and she was just fuming about it and thought it was outrageous. And she has no problem showing emotion. And he in private is the same as he is in public. He's totally one-dimensional.
What about Vice President Bush, Alessandra?
I think we have to add an extra dimension. It is true that Bush can be quite charming, especially one-on-one or with a group. But I'm always struck, actually, by how thin-skinned he really is. I mean, he's been saying now for months that he doesn't care about criticism anymore. He's learned to overcome it. He'll never get ulcers again. But in fact, even after the debate, when he's in private and he's just talking sort of on background with the reporters or just kidding around, he really gets very angry about people who criticize him, and he talks about the liberal media and the establishment. He rails against the same people that conservatives dislike, but conservatives used to do it about issues, about the Panama Canal or abortion or whatever. With George Bush, it's always quite personal. They attack me, and that's what fuels his right-wing anger. And it's interesting to watch. It's something we're going to be seeing, I'm sure, much more if he does get into the White House.
Norman, they've been following the candidates, and they've watched them up close. You've watched what the reporters have transmitted through the media. Mm-hmm. What is your perception? This seems to be an election based a lot on perceptions.
Well, it's certainly based a lot on perceptions. Frankly, I think one of the more disturbing elements here is that both candidates have discovered that the way to run a campaign in the modern era is to insulate yourself from the press as much as possible. If you learn what the hot buttons are for television especially, you can get by without having a lot of day-to-day contact. And if you do have a lot of day-to-day contact, as Mike Dukakis discovered early on when he was holding press conferences and Bush was not, you'll get creamed. Add to that George Bush's unhappiness with the press, which is clearly there. He is extremely thin-skinned. And my guess is we're in for another presidency which is very much stage-managed. Very few press conferences, a lot of helicopter sounds and the president saying you can't hear what the reporters are asking. A lot of stage management, and partly what makes that disturbing is that no matter how much we see reporters anguishing over it, they go along because it fits their needs.
Okay, Norman, when we return, let's take a look and try and probe what might be expected on Tuesday when INN Magazine continues. Don't go away.
What's the best brokerage account for an active investor? Ask a Schwab customer.
With my Schwab One asset management account, my money's never idle. When I sell a stock or I get a dividend, my cash instantly starts earning income. And it keeps on earning until I make my next investment.
When I need to get to my cash or take out a loan, I just use my Schwab Visa or write a check. Schwab One makes it easy.
All my financial moves are right here, and one simple statement. Now, you might expect to pay a lot of money for an account this handy, and not with Schwab One. There's no monthly fee. Now, that's real value.
To get your free booklet and an application for the Schwab One Asset Management account, call toll-free 800-641-1200. That's 800-641-1200. Call now for your free Schwab One booklet.
Asthma affects at least 3.5 million children in this country, causing more than 128 million missed school days each year. But it can be controlled. Most asthmatic children can do anything, including exercise, as long as they don't let fear or embarrassment prevent the correct use of medication. So if you have a child with asthma, explain to them and their friends just how important their medication is and how to take it. Also, if you have any questions, make sure you consult your family's pediatrician. So help control asthma and breathe a sigh of relief.
Norman, do you see any permanent damage as a result of all the negative campaigning?
We're going to continue to see negative campaigning for a long time. We're going to see more effective counters to it the next time around. This is not added to, however, the ability of the next president to get anything done. We're not going to see a mandate here. We're not going to see an active presidency for a whole set of reasons. Dragging the campaign down to this level is only one of them.
If George Bush wins on Tuesday, having resorted to the negative approach, what might that tell us about a Bush presidency?
George Bush has not provided the concrete issue positions on sweeping issues that would present a mandate. He's not going to have any pull on the ticket, and he's going to leave a bitter taste in the mouths of Democrats in Congress. He's got a lot of work to do.
From your first-hand observations, Eleanor and Alessandra, what do you anticipate will be happening on Tuesday?
Well, I expect it to be probably a mini Bush blowout, but I think the Democratic Congress will remain safely Democratic, and I think they're actually savoring the opportunity to face a Bush administration because they think he's less ideological and more moderate than Ronald Reagan, and he's easier to roll.
Alessandra?
I do think we're all going to wake up on Wednesday morning with a dreadful spiritual hangover. I mean, I think we'll feel depressed by the election and depressed about what lies ahead, which is one reason that Wall Street keeps predicting that James Baker will be chief of staff, because there's this desperate hope that things will get done anyway, or that the deficit will be addressed. But I think the main thing will be depression the day after.
Despite all and the negative advertising and campaigning, the issues in the end have finally come through, have they not?
Well, they have come through to a degree, but the big ones have been basically passed by the candidates, the deficit especially. There is no big thing there for the president to grab onto when we first start in 1989.
Well, thank you all so much. Our guest, Norman Ornstein, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute for Public Policy Research, and in Washington, Eleanor Clift, political correspondent for Newsweek, who's been covering the Dukakis campaign, and Alessandria Stanley, political correspondent for Time, who's been covering the Bush campaign. Next week, we'll look at the outcome of the election and how the new president will take over the reins of power. Our guest will be former Attorney General Edwin Meese, who headed President Reagan's transition team back in 1980. Until next week, for INN Magazine, I'm Marvin Scott.